Welcome to the Nation of History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one.
Billy the Kid, whose real name was William H. Bonney, possibly Henry McCarty, became a legendary figure of the American Old West, known for a turbulent life and constant trouble with the law. Although Hollywood romanticized him as a young, rebellious, and charismatic figure, the reality was more complex, since he was connected to serious episodes before his life came to an end at age 21. His thin build and protruding teeth did not seem intimidating, showing the contrast between his fragile appearance and his feared reputation. Born in the 19th century, Billy the Kid became involved in intense disputes during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, where he gained fame and notoriety. His path was marked by bold escapes and clashes with authorities, showing the harshness of the American frontier and the complexity of justice at the time. His story is a portrait of the instability of the West, making him an ambiguous cultural icon between hero and villain. The episode at the OK Corral, which happened on October 26, 1881 in Tombstone, Arizona, was one of the most iconic events of the Old West, but in reality it lasted only about 30 seconds, very different from the long tension often shown in movies. It mainly involved the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, along with Doc Holliday, facing the group of cowboys led by Ike Clanton and Billy Clanton, who were caught in an intense rivalry for influence in the small frontier town. The conflict came from built-up tensions caused by political, social, and economic disputes, including control over trade and law enforcement in a region marked by weak institutions and competition between ranchers and outsiders. The episode ended with serious losses and left deep marks on the history of the American West, becoming a symbol of the struggle between order and instability during a time of transition. John Henry Holliday graduated in dentistry in Pennsylvania during the 19th century, but his career was deeply affected by a serious lung condition that stayed with him throughout his life and drove away many fearful patients. To try to extend his life, he moved to the dry climate of the southwestern United States, where the air was less harsh on his weakened health. In this new phase, he became a professional gambler and a well-known figure in saloons, famous for his accuracy, coolness, and strong presence in events like the famous episode at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. Thin, pale, and worn down by illness, Holliday faced physical limits and the harshness of the Old West every day. His path illustrates the struggle against extreme conditions in a hostile environment, leading him to a complex fame marked by skill, tension, and the tragic aura of someone who always lived close to the edge. The famous Butch Cassidy, whose real name was Robert Leroy Parker, has been surrounded by mystery since the alleged episode in Bolivia in 1908, when his path supposedly ended along with his partner, the Sundance Kid. Although official accounts say both may have lost their lives during an action involving Bolivian authorities, there was never final confirmation, since the remains were never conclusively identified. Researchers and family members claim that Cassidy managed to return to the United States under a false identity, living quietly until the 1930s in the Northwest. His sister said she visited him in 1925, strengthening the possibility that he survived. This mystery became an intriguing chapter of Old West history, involving bold escapes and a life outside the law that remains surrounded by uncertainty and speculation to this day. Jesse James was a controversial American figure whose image was shaped not by the popular generosity often attributed to him, but by a harsh path during and after the Civil War. As a former member of a Confederate faction, he became close to the group led by Bloody Bill Anderson, which was linked to severe episodes against northern populations. After the conflict, Jesse remained involved in actions against banks and trains, feeding his legacy of danger and illegality. However, Media sympathetic to the Confederates built his image as a kind of Robin Hood, a hero of Southern resistance, even though there is no proof that he truly helped the poor. This idealization reflected post-war resentment in the southern United States, helping preserve a myth that still draws attention away from the real impact of his actions. His story shows how popular memory can turn controversial figures into lasting legends. Wild Bill Hickok was one of the most famous names of the American Old West, known for his skill with weapons and his direct style, unlike the romantic image of face-to-face duels. The popular idea of confrontations on empty streets where two men stare each other down before acting was mostly distorted by popular culture. In reality, many episodes came from unexpected encounters, personal rivalries, or arguments in bars, places where alcohol and provocation raised the risk of trouble. Wild Bill built his reputation by facing dangerous situations with coolness and speed, becoming a legend among lawmen and frontier figures of the 19th century. His life, marked by constant tension, ended on August 2, 1876 in Deadwood, South Dakota, when he was struck by surprise. This story reveals the real challenges of that time, far removed from the noble image of duels. Belle Starr, known as the Bandit Queen, became a legendary figure of the American Old West, much more because of sensationalist newspapers than because of her actual record of accusations, which was relatively modest and centered mainly on disputes involving horses. Born in 1848 in Missouri, she became involved with men wanted by the law, which strengthened the controversial aura that the media popularized through exaggeration. Despite the rumors, there are no reliable records showing that she led organized groups or took part in major daring actions. Her life was marked by tense episodes and conflicts, ending on February 3, 1889, in a case where the responsible person was never officially identified. The combination of reality and legend created a figure still surrounded by mystery and fascination, illustrating how the media can shape public perception of historical figures. Pat Garrett became known in Old West history for the episode involving William Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid, in 1881, an act that brought him fame but also pulled him into a life filled with personal and professional challenges. After that episode, Garrett tried to establish himself as a politician and businessman in New Mexico. But he faced election defeats and business failures, along with constant disputes with powerful ranchers and political opponents, which damaged his reputation and drained his resources. His path became marked by a series of difficulties that overshadowed his early fame. In 1908, his life ended under mysterious circumstances on an isolated road in New Mexico, creating questions that still have no final answer. His story is therefore a complex portrait of a man who defeated a legend but was later forgotten in the shadow of his own failures. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, built her fame in the 19th century American Old West through a life marked by hard work and a fearless personality. She worked as a laundress, cook, and possibly prostitute, surviving in a hostile and mostly male environment. Her connection to the famous gunman Wild Bill Hickok was greatly exaggerated, since historical documents suggest their relationship was little more than public association. Calamity Jane spread her own legend by selling an autobiography filled with invented facts at fairs and events, mixing reality and myth to create her image. Her frequent drinking and the account of a life marked by tragedy and intense emotions reflect the drama lived by women who challenged the social conventions of the time, never fully finding comfort in the official history of the West. John Wesley Hardin stood out in the American Old West as one of the most violent and controversial figures of the 19th century, known for claiming he had defeated more than 40 opponents, although official records confirm at least 20 cases attributed to him. The son of a Methodist preacher, His life was marked by conflict from an early age, reflecting the instability and harshness of the Texas frontier. Convicted of a serious crime, he spent about 16 years in prison, where he surprisingly used the time to study law, a skill that allowed him to work as an attorney after his release, especially in the city of El Paso. Hardin never left behind his feared reputation, and his path finally ended in 1895 when he was struck while playing dice in a saloon, an ending that reinforced his image as a hard and controversial man in the imagination of the American West. Tom Horn, an iconic figure of the American Old West, spent his life working as a scout and took part in the capture of Apache leader Geronimo, becoming a controversial frontier figure. After that period, he began working for powerful ranchers in the late 19th century during disputes against small cattle owners and suspected cattle thieves, charging about $600 per job, which intensified the social conflict between large landowners and rural workers. In 1903, his turbulent path came to an end when he was convicted in a case involving a boy of only 14, an accusation he always denied, creating debates about justice in a setting of fragile law and order. The episode marked a difficult chapter in American frontier history, illustrating the impact of tensions between private justice and official legality during that turbulent period. Native American leaders Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Geronimo led organized military strategies during the 19th century, challenging stereotypes that portrayed them as disorderly groups. For decades, they led campaigns against the expansion of the United States Army into indigenous territories. One landmark was the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876, when Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors defeated the troops of General George Custer, who underestimated his opponents. This clash revealed the strength and resistance of Native peoples, showing complex alliances and deep knowledge of the land. Despite repression and the advance of settlement, these battles showed their determination to defend lands and cultures against overwhelming challenges. The history of these leaders supports a fairer narrative about the organization of indigenous nations in resistance to oppression. Wyatt Earp, a complex figure of the American Old West, built a reputation that mixed justice and illegality, a lesser-known side that challenges the traditional movie myth. Before becoming the legendary lawman of the shootout at the OK Corral, Earp faced accusations of vagrancy and horse theft, while also running brothels and gambling operations in several western towns. This double role, acting as both an agent of order and a businessman in illegal activities, reveals a clever personality capable of manipulating the press and shaping his public image. Even while still alive, he gave interviews that amplified his exploits, making sure his fame grew beyond his actual contributions. This ambiguity shows how Old West narratives were built between truth and legend, reflecting the social and economic challenges of a frontier where law and disorder often blended together. His story raises debates about the line between hero and villain in popular memory. The Texas Rangers, often praised as symbols of justice and order in the 19th century, played a controversial role that challenges this glorified image. Working mainly along the border between the United States and Mexico, these lawmen were responsible for severe episodes that affected hundreds of Mexicans and Native Americans, many of whom received no fair trial of any kind. One of the most emblematic episodes was Porvenir, which happened in 1918, when 15 innocent Mexican men lost their lives during a Rangers action. For decades, the Texas government made efforts to hide or minimize these events, reflecting the ethnic conflicts and political tensions of the time. This history reveals the limits of the law and order promoted by the Rangers, showing abuses against marginalized communities that marked the building of the Texas frontier. The legacy of this period continues to spark debates about historical justice and critical review of official narratives. The presence of African American, Mexican, and indigenous cowboys in the American Old West represents a chapter of United States history that is often forgotten. It is estimated that between 25% and 35% of cowboys were African American, many of them freed men who, after the Civil War, found cattle work to be a rare opportunity for economic and social independence. Along with them, Mexicans and Native peoples also made up a significant share of these workers. Figures like Nat Love, known as Deadwood Dick, became rodeo celebrities, challenging stereotypes and showing skill and courage. However, when Hollywood created the cowboy myth, many of these contributions were pushed into the background, promoting a simplified view of history. This cultural invisibility hid the real diversity of the American West and still shapes popular perception today. The average life of an armed man in the Old West rarely passed age 40 because of the many risks surrounding that way of life, in a setting of constant rivalries and ongoing tension. Becoming a famous gunfighter usually meant attracting unwanted attention, since notoriety brought not only admirers, but also challengers, enemies, and people eager to test his reputation. Unlike the romantic image created by popular culture, many of these outcomes did not happen in heroic public duels, but through illness, heavy drinking, betrayal, or unexpected disputes. The few who managed to survive longer often chose to leave that life behind, moving to other regions or reinventing their paths. This portrait reveals the harsher side of the Old West, far from movie myths, showing that the instability and hardship of the era took a relentless and early toll. The California Gold Rush, which took place between 1848 and 1855, attracted about 300,000 people looking for quick wealth, but few truly prospered. The gold fever was a social and economic phenomenon that reshaped the region, but most prospectors returned home with less than they had brought. The easiest gold ran out quickly, giving way to mining that required expensive equipment and industrial methods, which were out of reach for most newcomers. In this setting, the people who truly built wealth were the suppliers of tools, food, clothing, and essential services needed to support the miners. Among them, Levi Strauss stood out by making durable clothing, especially reinforced denim pants, which became symbols of strength and practicality during the period. This rush deeply transformed California's economy and demographics, laying the groundwork for the region's industrial and urban development. In the American Old West, the major railroads represented enormous economic power, often described as a network of institutional influence. Behind formal clothing, their executives influenced state legislatures, pressured judges, and expanded their reach over sheriffs and governors, using the legal system to favor corporate interests. The conflict between railroads and small farmers involved the removal of rural landowners, supported by laws favorable to companies, creating tensions that shaped territorial expansion in the 19th century. This scene of institutionalized control shows that the struggle in the West was not limited to outlaws, but was deeply rooted in the economic and political power held by railroad companies. The influence of the railroads shaped North American social and territorial development, revealing how the frontier dispute also moved through courts, contracts, and corporate interests. In the turbulent setting of the American Old West, women like Mattie Silks in Denver and Big Nose Kate in Tombstone challenged social norms by building economic power and political influence during the 19th century, at a time when they did not have the right to vote. These businesswomen not only ran profitable nightlife establishments, but also invested in property, financed political campaigns, and gave loans to local businessmen, playing a strategic role in the communities where they worked. Their financial success made them respected figures, although Hollywood often portrays them as mere supporting characters, ignoring their key role as entrepreneurs and economic actors. This reality reveals how women managed to rise socially and economically, influencing the development of towns in the American West. The influence of these businesswomen marks female resistance and boldness in difficult contexts. Bat Masterson was an iconic figure of the American Old West, first known for his work as sheriff in Dodge City during the late 19th century, where he took part in memorable armed confrontations and kept a close friendship with the legendary Wyatt Earp. His career in law enforcement and fighting violence made him a symbol of the most turbulent period of United States territorial expansion. However, his life gained a lesser-known chapter when, already in middle age, he moved to New York and reinvented himself as a sports journalist, covering boxing matches for the Morning Telegraph newspaper. This transition reflects a more human and adaptable side of Masterson, who lived through the transformation from the violent West to urban modernity. He died unexpectedly in 1921 while working, seated at his desk with a pen in his hand, showing his dedication until his final moments. The Pony Express, founded in April 1860, became one of the most iconic symbols of the American Old West by providing fast communication between Missouri and California across about 1,864 miles, with messages delivered in about 10 days. Despite this remarkable achievement for the time, which involved riders facing difficult terrain and constant dangers, the service lasted only 18 months, ending operations in October 1861. Its brief existence was mainly due to financial failure, since the company was never profitable because of high costs and competition from the telegraph, which revolutionized communication by making the sending of information almost instant and safer. The end of the Pony Express marked the decline of older, epic forms of communication in the American West in the face of rapid technological modernization during the 19th century. Even so, its story remains alive as a testimony to courage and endurance in pioneer times. The American Old West, an iconic phase of territorial expansion and conflict among frontiersmen, indigenous peoples, and settlers, was officially declared over in 1890 by the United States Census Bureau, which announced the end of the frontier. This change marked the close of an era of about 30 years, when vast, largely unexplored regions gave way to towns, railroads, and civilian settlements. Interestingly, only 13 years later, in 1903, the film The Great Train Robbery appeared, establishing the Western genre in cinema and turning that recent period into popular myth. The film not only portrayed a brief past, but also idealized hard life, outlaw activity, and legendary figures, helping build a cultural imagination that lasts to this day. This process reveals how collective memory can shape and romanticize recent events, influencing United States identity and the global imagination of the Old West.
If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.